Can you hear me now? Okay. We're going to start with the public hearing. I need a motion to open the public hearing.
I think first, don't we?
What have I forgotten?
Usually we have him do the presentation.
Before we open the public
Yes,
hearing?
ma'am.
Typically.
You know,
I'll ask you to do that.
That's all right. I don't think anybody cares.
thank you, Ben.
Yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
Gentlemen. Tell us what you have.
All right. Excuse me, Madam Chair, Honorable Commissioners, and Madam Administrator. There she is. She's over there. For the record, my name is Ben Griffith, and I am your Olmsted County Planning Director. The first item before you this morning is a public hearing for extension of the current interim compost siting moratorium as allowed by Minnesota Statute 394.34. As many of you already know, food waste entering the solid waste stream from area restaurants, schools, hospitals, grocery stores, local businesses, and even residents creates a burden and strain on our solid waste management system, both at the waste-to-energy facility at the county campus as well as the Kalmar landfill. To address this, the Environmental Resources Department is exploring better reuse options ranging from aerobic composting to anaerobic digestion and has been approached by several entities and individuals interested in doing so on a commercial scale. However, currently both the county zoning and solid waste ordinances are silent regarding the location and operation of such facilities. The Environmental Resource Department asked the Planning Department to assist in the drafting of the ordinance language relating to the location and operation of such facilities, and a one-year moratorium was requested and unanimously approved by this board on July 7th, 2020. Although great progress has been made by both environmental resources and planning staff, additional time is needed to receive feedback from MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, on any proposed changes to the solid waste and zoning ordinances. While both Environmental Resources Director Tony Hill and myself feel it will take approximately 3 to 6 months for us to complete drafting the ordinances, it is not known how much time PCA will need to review and comment on the proposed amendments to the solid waste and zoning ordinances before they could be adopted by the Olmsted County Board of Commissioners. A public hearing was held on June 17, 2021 by the Olmsted County Planning Advisory Commission, and they unanimously recommended approval of the proposed moratorium extension for a year. With that, both Environmental Resources and Planning staffs recommend approval of the extension of the current interim compost siting moratorium ordinance effective tomorrow, July 7th, 2021, not to exceed 1 year thereafter. I'll be glad to answer any questions the commissioners may have, and Environmental Resources Director Tony Hill is also available for any questions you all may have on this matter. When your questions have been addressed, I would ask that the chair officially open the public hearing and that the county board act favorably on the attached ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now.
Just trying to help you out.
Chewing on your Skittles? Okay, so can I hear a motion to open the public hearing?
Discussion first, Madam Chair.
A discussion first.
Questions? I have a question. I think
I'm
we have
sorry.
questions
Yes, ma'am.
before we open the public hearing. So what are you anticipating? You're anticipating that there are commercial interests who are interested in doing this organics composting.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Hill's talked to several of them over the last year.
Okay, there are several. And are you thinking that when this happens, this will be located? Do you have a site in mind for the composting?
We don't have a specific site in mind, but we did have to address it in the zoning ordinance to where if the location is determined where it would best be located. And we've identified that in our draft ordinance.
So you think a year will give enough time for the interested parties to develop a solid proposal, in which time we can then look at the ordinance and citing? Am I understanding?
Yes, ma'am. They're aware that we have the moratorium in place and are researching this. And we're learning a lot from PCA, who is undergoing a revision of their ordinances as well, or their regulations as well at the same time.
Are we anticipating that these private enterprises would choose their own site? Or are we anticipating that we would be helping them select a site, perhaps where we already have our own waste-to-energy facilities? What do we anticipate?
It could be a combination of both.
It could be a combination. Okay, thank you.
What happens to the end products after all this bubbling up?
generally producing compost or compostable material that could be used on yards, and it can also be used in agriculture
Okay.
for the food waste.
It would come in bags then, or?
I'm not sure. Mr. Hill may be the better one to address that. Generally, probably for what you would use at your home, probably so, but for a larger scale, it would be probably in a truckload size.
No, just a question about, would you be expecting households as well to sort out their um, food garbage from their other trash?
I don't know. That would be a question for Mr. Hill. He's here. There he is. He's behind me.
Morning.
Good morning. Tony Hill, Director of Environmental Resources. So right now they're looking at commercial sites only. But yes, residential is an option down the road, and so they would be separating out their material at the residence, so from their garbage.
And do I understand right that there's no meat products or bones in that? It's all sort of vegetables and fruit stuff.
Yeah, that's what they're looking at. Yeah, is the vegetable and
Potato peelings, grapefruit rinds.
yes, yeah, the vegetables and fruits right
I know
now.
my vegetables. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why one thing we have to be cautious and we have to take our time is because of the vector issue with the rodents, and we want to be sure that they do it right.
Madam Chair, another question. Mr. Hill, are we anticipating that any development of this as a commercial enterprise would serve only Olmsted County, or are we going to have any concerns about limiting the scope of the enterprise and geography, in terms of geography, or is that going to be an open question as well?
That would be an open question, but we're looking at right now, I think just Olmsted County, Olmsted-County, since that's our the community that we work with on solid waste issues. So right now it'd just be the two counties, but down the road we could look at something in a regional scale.
And would that be voluntary on the part of the commercial places or required?
Right now it'd be voluntary. Yeah.
Thank you.
This moratorium is not designed to discourage that activity. It's just really, it's a moratorium because we want to make sure that the compost sites are appropriate for the neighborhoods. Is that correct? Because we want to keep this waste out of our energy plant, right? I mean, burning carbon doesn't do us much good out of food waste.
Yeah, we want to make sure that it's cited, in the appropriate place. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, not necessarily question, statement, but I am in favor of the moratorium. But I also think that the county needs to work more rapidly on looking at their own plans for the future for solid waste. Because I think that there is an advantage for the county to look at its own organic recycling. It's a process of first of all, hopefully we'll get the MRF project, and then that leads into organic separation. And we have large entities to work with in the county, Mayo Clinic being the largest, and also the restaurants. But also it could create efficiencies for our own waste handling system to move in the direction of organic recycling, because it reduces our own waste stream. And I believe it's easier for us to keep track of how we're doing things and making sure that we're following the rules and keeping the community safe, rather than trying to regulate somebody else to do the right thing. So I do think that those things are really important for us to look at before we move into commercial operations of this. So it's my comment.
So, Mr. Hill, we're going to do this one-year moratorium on citing. Are you anticipating that you will? What's your timeline, or projected timeline for having a proposal that we would need to address more systematically?
Yeah, as Ben spoke to, we're hoping within 3 to 6 months that we'd have that completed. And at the same time, I know that some of these owners are actually working as we're speaking on laying out their plan, their business plan. And so I think we're hoping that once we're ready, that we'll hit the ground running with them.
And are you anticipating that we simply are supporting a private enterprise, or that we are going to somehow be an investor, or be seeking proposals? You know, what role are you anticipating the county to have in terms of selecting the operator, managing any component of it, or being party to it?
Yeah, we don't see ourselves right now with these facilities as being a party to them. We'd be permitting them and inspecting them, but we wouldn't be, we wouldn't be part owners.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I'll make a motion to open a public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this issue? Anyone here wishing to speak on this issue? Third time. Anyone here wishing to speak on this issue?
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The public hearing is closed. Thank you.
Motion to
And move.
approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the moratorium. Are there any questions or discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, motion carries. Thank you all. We'll now move on to the consent agenda. Approve the June 15th, 2021 Olmsted County Board meeting minutes. Proclaim July 18th to 24th as pretrial probation and parole supervision week. Approve application for the Legacy Grant with funding dedicated to a Chester Woods amphitheater. Approve temporary liquor license. Appoint Benjamin Johnson. Ben, do you like to be called Benjamin or Ben? Or sir from now on? Ben, all right. Appoint Ben Johnson as county engineer. Approve snowmobile trail grant application. Approve revocable license to use property between Olmsted County Housing and Redevelopment Authority, CC Silver Creek Corner, LLC, and Olmsted County. Accept Eliminating Health Disparities Grant Award. Approve gambling permit for the Rochester Area Builders Incorporated.
Move to approve consent agenda.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved.
Congratulations, Ben.
Yes. And now we move on to the regular agenda. The first discussion items is the 2021 legislative update. Jennifer.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm happy to be here this morning. For the record, my name is Jennifer Burkwa. I'm legislative analyst with Olmsted County. And I'm happy to be here this morning to report that the legislature has concluded its work, specifically the budget, and that was finished on June 30th, and we avoided a government shutdown, a state government shutdown. So I think that's good news. And I am here to share a summary of specifically the Olmsted County priorities, and then a brief overview of kind of what happened overall. So Claire, you can go to the next slide, please. Going into the 2021 session, we had just finished up an election, and we were the only divided legislature in the country. And I think that was for like the second or third year in a row. There was the same leadership, so Speaker Melissa Hortman, Majority Leader Gazelka, and the minority leaders were the same too as the previous year, and Governor Walz. So they had experience working with each other, which proved to be a good thing in the end, I think. It was a budget year, as you know. They had to get a 2-year budget finished, or there would be a state shutdown. And going into the session, we were projecting a budget deficit. Due to COVID, there was a rare May forecast, and that estimated a $2.4 billion deficit for the biennium of 2020 and 2021. By the time November came around, they do another forecast, and that showed a $600 million surplus for the current biennium, but they were still projecting a $1.2 billion shortfall for the biennium that we just started now. So that we were, thinking there would be some challenges right from the beginning. Plus, we were in the midst of an ongoing public health emergency. So just a lot of things going on. And I should also mention that I believe the legislature had been in session every month since February of 2020. So it was just kind of, it felt long and it felt tiring, I think, to a lot of people. We can go to the next slide, please. So in summary, it started up on January 5th. It adjourned on May 17th, which is the constitutional end date. But no budget bills had passed yet, as you know. So a special session was necessary. They convened that on June 14th, and that coincided with when the governor extended his 30-day executive authorities. And thankfully, they were able to pass all the needed budget bills by June 30th. The House adjourned sine die that night on the 30th, but the Senate is still in session, and they're scheduled to meet at 10 o'clock this morning. I believe they may take up some commissioner appointments, so we'll see what happens there. And then there were a variety of meeting formats this year, you know, similar to what the county board has done. In person, the Senate met quite a bit in person. There were virtual meetings and hybrid, so that added some challenges too, I think. Significant federal funding came through, as we all know, and that ended up probably helping with the budget agreements near the end of session. And then when February came, it indicated a budget surplus, so more good news. As session kind of went on, we were getting better news. The February forecast showed a $1.6 billion surplus, so that was quite a turnaround from November to February. And then kind of a summary, next slide please, you got it, a summary of what passed. They passed a $52 million budget. About half of the state ARP funding was used to help finalize the budget. So I think the state received about 2.5 or 2.6 billion from the ARP, and half of this was used to develop the 2-year budget. And then there was significant per pupil increases for schools, about 1.2 billion. And there was tax relief. Most of this came business relief for federal payroll loans, the PPP. There was also tax relief for workers who collected unemployment insurance. And the tax bill also extended tax credits for working families. And it included a lot of good things for counties too, and we'll get to that shortly. The public health emergency executive authorities ended up ending July 1st, and that was a little bit of a surprise. I think the bill that passed in was either passed on the 29th or 30th, so that end kind of came suddenly. And then there was agreement on a 105-day plan to phase out the eviction moratorium. There was a technical corrections bonding bill, no new appropriations. Our interchange technical correction was included in there, which was good. And they, I didn't have this on the slide, but they also, I believe they for sure replenished the budget reserve, and I think they may have increased it even. So I think that's good news for future budgets. And then we can go on. So the first Olmsted County priority related to health and human services, and there's a lot of words on this slide, I apologize for that, but we had a priority related to health and human services financing and service delivery, and 2 of the items under that priority did pass this year. So one of them was to codify 4 human services COVID-19 waivers or flexibilities, and those 4 related to applying for MFIP benefits remotely, min choices assessments, some flexibility there as far as doing remote work, targeted case management, again, remote targeted case management in some situations, and then flexibility in the absence policy for individuals receiving housing supports. So those were all, that was all positive things, they all passed. Senator Nelson carried the bill that initially included these 4 waivers, so we thank her for her leadership on that. And Chair Liebling, who chairs the House Health Committee, was instrumental in making sure all of these things passed as well. And then another priority related to short and long-term COVID response needs. And the first area, public health, has been instrumental in addressing the pandemic. And we received local public health got unseen funding increases. I mean, it was kind of like we've never seen these kind of increases before. So I think really happy in that area. $6 million for a new program. It's supposed to fund local public health distribution framework. And I think that remains to be seen exactly how that will roll out and what that will mean. But I think good news for public health infrastructure. $7 million increase for the local public health grants. And I believe that's near a 30% increase over base. So lots of other investments in local public health too. That's just, two big ones with significant funding increases. The Adult Mental Health Initiative grants, we received a $1.75 million per year increase in that area. It's for the next 3 years, and I believe it's funded with the federal dollars. But again, that will help respond to those in mental health and behavioral health crisis situations. And Senator Senjum chief authored that bill, and Olmsted County was pretty active in ensuring that moved forward. There was $6 million per year increase for emergency services program, a $50 per month base rate increase for housing supports, and $1 million per year for shelter capital, and all of these help with housing stability. And again, Olmsted County was active in advocating for those programs along with groups like Catholic Charities. And then there was to help with economic assistance, there was a one-time $435 payment to low-income families who qualify for MFIP, and also an annual cost of living increase. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, another top priority of Olmsted County was to ensure the viability of resource recovery facilities. The House initially carried some provisions that would negatively impact that, specifically related to the renewable energy status of waste to energy. The Senate did not carry the same provisions, and ultimately it was left out of the final bill. So we're appreciative of that. And again, Senator Senjum, as chair of the Senate Energy Committee, was very supportive of Olmsted County and wasted energy in general. The broadband investment, there's $70 million over the biennium for the border-to-border broadband program. This is the most funding they've ever put into broadband. So that's a good thing, and there's potentially more federal funding coming for that purpose. Increased affordable housing stock. The housing committees were pretty busy this year. A lot of different things passed. I think some of the most significant were $100 million for housing infrastructure bonds and $10 million for the state housing tax credit. That was included in the tax bill. Senator Nelson was a very strong leader on this. I don't think it would have passed without her tenacity and ensuring that it was in there. So I think it kind of surprised us a little bit, but it was something that Olmsted County has been advocating for a long time. So it's not a huge investment right now, but we're hoping that we can prove that it works well and that it'll lay the groundwork for future investment. Transportation funding, I say we're about 50% accomplishing this priority. There was no new constitutionally dedicated revenue, but there were other significant investments in transportation, and that included $14 million for the local bridge program, $5.5 million for the local road improvement program, an extra $5 million per biennium for the CASA, And then 100 million for corridors of commerce in fiscal year 24 and 100 million in fiscal year 25. Initially, the Senate transportation bill had an earmark for trunk highway bonds for the county, or CASA 44 trunk highway 14 interchange in Olmsted County. That did not make it into the final bill and was not in MnDOT's letter of projects that they were committed to moving forward with. But I'm hopeful that maybe corridors of commerce or some of the other funding could help fund the MnDOT share of that project going forward. I believe Kay or Ben can confirm, but I think it's scored pretty well in corridors of commerce in the past.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's good that we put that intersection up to number 2 on our bonding list because the $11 million went away. And that the list that the commissioner put out, we talked about this at Public Works, of projects in the state still doesn't even have that intersection on their list. It's not even on our list. So we're hopeful, but I don't know how hopeful we are to get some of that $200 million for that intersection. But I've asked Kay to see it, and she's going to talk to you, Jennifer, about maybe we need to go back up there and visit with Senjum and Margaret and see if we can get that on the list, because it appears to me that it's off the radar. I mean, it's off the radar up there. We're glad for the technical fix, but we got to keep the pressure on because there is no money right now till at least 24, and then we got that 100 million for corridors of commerce goes across the state. Well, it doesn't take long for the Twin Cities to chew up $100 million worth. I mean, that's one big bridge on 694. So we got to keep, if you were concerned that we put too much pressure moving it up to number 2, it might end up having to go up to number 1 in another year because people are getting killed up there. And apparently we're not getting their attention up there. So, and then the other thing, we're glad to get anything, but $14 million for local bridge program, that's pretty low, isn't it, Kay, in the scheme of things? I mean, $14 million is $14 million, but across the state, typically that's like 30 million, something like that, and that doesn't even begin to cover the structure. So this transportation thing, I mean, we can say what we like, but we're not keeping up with the needs of transportation. So thank you.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. These are our final 4 priorities. The first 2, maintaining county program aid and ensuring local control for counties and property tax levy decisions. We were a little more concerned about these 2 items when there was a potential budget deficit, but those concerns didn't really come to fruition when there ended up being a surplus after the February forecast. And thankfully, with Senator Nelson as tax chair, and I think House Chair Mark Hort as well, they both they're strong supporters of local governments, and I don't know that either of these things were on their minds, strongly on their minds. So that was a positive thing. Addressing the expenses counties incur for the cleanup of tax forfeiture properties. We were successful in getting language included in the Senate Environment Bill that would allow counties or clarify that counties could take the proceeds of tax forfeiture properties and set it aside in a special account and use that funding to clean up other properties. But the House never heard the bill, and it didn't come back from the conference committee. The Environment Committee is, how should I say it? They had some other big philosophical differences, and I think that anything that wasn't the same in both bills, it seems like they just dropped. But it's something that, I don't know that there was opposition to it. I think it's something that we'll bring back again next year in a policy year. And then the repeal of the local government salary cap, that didn't pass either. It was included on the House side, which it has been before, but the Senate does not support that provision, so it didn't pass. Any questions on Olmsted County's core priorities? we can go on to the next slide then. These are some other key issues that passed. So I mentioned the technical correction to the CASA 44 Trunk Highway 14 2020 bonding appropriation was included in that technical bonding bill. After we had already identified our 9 priorities, the legislative planning group identified another priority that was brought forward by family support and assistance, and it relates to the basic sliding fee wait list. We were advocating for that wait list to be reprioritized. We were hoping that it would be a permanent change, and that would allow Olmsted County and other counties to serve more families that qualify for basic sliding fee childcare. There was a significant amount of federal funding that could be used for childcare related programs, so they did extend it, or they did do this reprioritization for 3 years. The formula, there's a small formula change that will be a permanent change, and then they added an additional appropriation for basic sliding fee. So I think we view this as a win. Ideally, it would have been nice to make the change permanent, but I think that if we can demonstrate that this change works well over the next 3 years and it doesn't have a significant cost in the tails, that, you know, there's another opportunity to make it permanent in the future. This was something totally new this year as well, but $20 million for homeless prevention aid to counties. And that will be effective calendar year 2023 through calendar year 2028. Olmsted County is estimated to receive nearly $600,000. And this is a new idea. It came from Representative Gomez, I believe, out of Minneapolis, and it would be kind of like county program aid, but for the purpose of helping families and youth address homelessness. So we're excited about this and seeing what we can do with this funding. And then there was an appropriation to hold counties harmless for a billing error that occurred, gosh, was it 2019? I don't remember for sure, but there was some kind of a billing error, and counties owed DHS money. And Olmsted County's share of this is about $350,000. So we're not going to have to pay that back, or we're going to be reimbursed for it. I'm not sure how that will work, but we're not on the hook for that funding anymore, which is another good thing. There was an increase for Community Corrections Act counties, $2.44 million per biennium. That's not ongoing, but there is a working group scheduled with that increase, and they're supposed to be looking at the funding and I don't know. I'm probably not the expert to talk about this, but I think there's 3 community corrections models in the state right now. And I think they're going to look at, are those 3 models the best way? Should we be doing things with one model? Or, you know, just taking a closer look at how we do community corrections. And then there was also...
Madam Chair, I think I would assume Mr. Grancy's on top of this, but I would really advocate that we do everything we can to have full representation on that work group. We've been a leader in corrections in our state for a long, long time. And then I was also wondering, the $600,000 on homeless prevention, is that one-time funding? Is that annual funding?
I believe it's annual, but there is a sunset date on the program.
Thank you.
And then the last thing I thought I'd mention is that there was a $700,000 annual appropriation increase for the SCORE grant funding, and that provides funding in the solid waste area for counties. Overall, I mean, there were a lot of good things that passed. The Health and Human Services bill put another $100 million into Health and Human Services. There was maybe some cost shifts that ultimately did not come through. So I think, you know, just in general, I feel like it was a long session, but I think it was a pretty good session for counties. There are still a few issues to resolve. There's talk about potential special session in September, and this is to appropriate bonuses for emergency workers. There was federal ARP dollars that was supposed to go to like frontline workers, and the state has set up a task force or some kind of a working group to determine how to divvy out that money or how to appropriate it. So that's in the works. There's been talk that maybe there will be a small bonding bill in September at the time of that special session, but that remains to be seen. And then redistricting will also get started this summer and probably end up in the courts. So I think that's all I had for you today. I'll have
Madam
a
Chair, on the redistricting question, I just want to remind people that we heard that the state demographer will get data from the census in August and have an opportunity to comment on that. And then that will be sent back into the feds, and then we get our official data in September. So I'm assuming the legislature is being strategic in choosing September for a special session because they will finally have the data. But we'll have had an advance, the state demographer can give them some advanced information in preparation for redistricting. I mean, I know redistricting, people ask me all the time what's going to happen. Nobody knows what the schedule is, and everyone assumes we're going to go to court, but just those two pieces are really critical, that we get the official data from census and that the legislature takes some action. So,
thank you. All right, I think that's all I had. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
as a member of the legislative committee, I just want to commend Ms. Bergman. She's done a fabulous job for us, and she's involved our staff in many different opportunities where their expertise has had an influence with legislative outcome. And there are a couple of things that we would not have anticipated happening at all that I think happened because we have the skillful legislative liaison that we do. So must be wonderful to get to the end of the 2020-2021 session and have a month or two before you go back at it. But thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, now we have the COVID impact survey and response. Mr. Briggs.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Graham Briggs. I'm the Director of Public Health for Olmsted County. And I think if it's okay with the board, I'm going to switch things up a little bit and do my update first, and then we'll pass it off to Megan to talk about the COVID impact survey. So I've got a couple of slides. Let me grab them here. And while I'm getting this ready, I'd just like to say it is my pleasure to be back in person and see all of you guys after the last year and a half. It feels like getting to know you really well virtually. So good to be back. So I think today, in addition to being here in person, there's a good amount of good news and positive news, I think, for Olmsted County here. Number one being our case rate is down to the lowest level it's been with COVID since the very beginning of the pandemic. I wanted to specifically avoid charts and graphs today since I've been showing all of you charts and graphs for a year and a half now with all this, but this is the one that I think shows very clearly how vaccine has really helped push down our viral transmission here locally, to the point that we're seeing 1, 2, 3 cases a day or something like that coming through the system on the average. So that puts us in a position that we haven't been in since last March. We can see our vaccine rate, our uptake has been very good here in Olmsted County. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with this, but we've had over 100,000 of our residents now have received at least a dose of vaccine. We're over 95% of those over 65, over 80% of those over 16 years old, which remember the governor's objective was to get to 70%. The national goal was to 70% in 18 plus year olds by July 1st. So we're doing very well in our vaccine uptake, and that really is that magic bullet behind our decrease in cases down to an almost immeasurable level. We do still have some work ahead. You know, if we're looking at 80% of 16 plus year olds, once we add in the 12 to 15 year olds, we're at about 78% or so. So that still means we've got about 1 in 5 people out there that could get vaccine that have not for some reason. So that's something that we're continuing to work on to make sure it's available for those that are interested. Just some highlights as we're looking at the summary numbers here now. It's about 8.5% or over 13,000 of our residents here in Olmsted County were confirmed with COVID during the pandemic since last March. And that compares with about 10.7% of Minnesota's population, and 10.1% of the entire United States population has tested positive for COVID at this point. We've had 646 Olmsted residents that have been admitted to the hospital as part of this. That's about 0.5% of everyone that lives in this county has been admitted. In Minnesota, we've had over 32,000 people hospitalized, or about 0.6% of all Minnesota residents have been hospitalized. We can compare that to, it's estimated about 5.6 million United States residents, or about 1.7% of the entire United States population, had to be hospitalized due to COVID infection. In Olmsted County, we've had 102 deaths. In Olmsted residents, that's 1 out of about every 1,500 residents in Olmsted County has died due to the infection. And I think this is the most remarkable number, since it's obviously the most severe or the worst outcome. We can compare our rate of 1 out of every 1,500 to the rate in Minnesota is 1 out of every 700 residents in the entire state of Minnesota has died. That's over 7,700 deaths. And when we look at just the average overall at the United States, it's over 604,000 people now that have been confirmed dead due to COVID infection. That's 1 out of every 542 residents across the nation. And we are fairly confident as we look at this historically that number is going to increase. I've seen estimates around 900,000 once you start including cases that were not tested and things like that. So in Olmsted County, we've had 102 deaths too many, but when we compare it to some of the other places around the country, they've been hit quite a bit harder than we have. So just looking operationally at some of the things that we've done over the last year and a half, we did almost 77,000 tests through the Graham Park testing site. It was operated collaboratively with Olmsted County, Olmsted Medical Center, and the Mayo Clinic. We've interviewed over 9,800 confirmed cases through the health department, identified over 21,000 contacts associated with COVID infection. We received over 4,200 phone calls from the public or from partners asking for information about COVID. We've identified and interrupted transmission in 553 different clusters of COVID transmission. And Olmsted County specifically, just through our doors, we've administered over 24,000 doses of vaccine. So just a huge endeavor, a huge amount of work that the staff has done over the last year and a half. Now, we're seeing an evolution here, I think, in Olmsted County. Our case rate is extremely low, the lowest it's been since the start of the pandemic. But I do need to mention that there is an ongoing pandemic beyond Olmsted County here, that we do have risk that is remaining in unvaccinated populations. So we do expect in Olmsted County, in these pockets of unvaccinated populations right now, anybody under 12 or populations that decide not to get vaccinated or for some reason that we're not aware of don't have access to vaccine are still at risk, especially as we're seeing this new Delta variant emerge. And so we do expect to continue to see cases, but much more similar to what we would see with routine outbreaks of whooping cough or salmonella or something like that, where we can look at that localized transmission and then treat that like we would a typical outbreak. But some other counties, states, and really parts of the world overall that remain with large populations that are unvaccinated are going to continue to see waves of this pandemic until they either get vaccinated or we develop enough herd immunity in those populations to suppress transmission. So right now, Arkansas and southern Missouri, if you're watching the national story, are getting hit very hard with this Delta variant as it's emerging into rural populations in that area of the country. And so, unfortunately, I think some parts of the country are going to continue to see this. I just saw over the weekend, it's over 1,000 counties across the United States have under 30% of their populations vaccinated. So there's still a significant risk in those populations. So, well, we're doing great. You know, we've got 80% of our 16-plus-year-olds vaccinated. There is still some risk, but we are in a good position, the best position we've been in since the start of the pandemic at this point. Having said that, the more residents that get vaccinated, so this doesn't mean that if you haven't been vaccinated, you're fine, nothing to worry about, the pandemic's over. Um, for every resident that gets vaccinated, it's helping to protect this entire community. Right now, for children under 12, there is still risk of infection. There is still risk potentially of severe disease in rare situations. And so every person that gets vaccinated helps to protect those communities and those people that either can't get vaccinated or choose not to get vaccinated. So the more people we vaccinate, the more safe we're going to be as a community here. So because of everything I told you this morning, the Public Health Department has demobilized our Operations Center as of July 1st. The need for county-level emergency response has been eliminated really due to the lack of transmission. So we are to a point where we can't find anything for the people to do in our Department Operations Center, so we've been moving them back over the last few weeks to their roles that they had before the pandemic started. And we've gotten to the point now that all staff that have been involved in the pandemic have started going through the debriefing process. We're offering support through the county and through human resources with behavioral mental health and giving people a little break as they move back into their old positions. And so we're in that process now with everybody and completely demobilizing. That doesn't mean, you know, if we saw a change here, we could ramp back up. But at this point, we just don't see a need for an emergency operation at a department or county level. Our COVID-19 investigation, since we do expect that we're going to see some more of this, we're transferring into our disease prevention and control unit. That's the group that handles routine infectious disease outbreaks and that sort of thing. So that is a great piece of news. I think this is the day that we've been looking forward to for the last year and a half, is to get to the point that we don't have to have an emergency level operation anymore. So I think the natural question is, where do we go now in public health?
Could I ask a question about that? Because it's a segue into the broader discussion about where we go with public health. Are you anticipating doing a general post-action debrief summary document of some sort?
Yep.
That probably, you know, would be more use internally than probably to the public or to the board. But as you know, the State Community Health Advisory Committee that I serve on is seeking to be a catalyst. I think in some ways we were a catalyst for securing some of that extra funding because we took a position on that. But now as we look toward the future and Public Health 3.0, asking ourselves what we've learned and using Olmsted as a model, I think, for other communities to debrief. I'm looking for the assistance of our staff that we can take to the State Community Health Advisory Council's discussions. In fact, we are looking at potentially doing a session at the Association of Minnesota Counties annual meeting. So if the staff can help us frame this up in a way that's really truly interactive, and thank you for bringing that to LPHA, and they've agreed to do that at the state annual meeting. I think there's not the support for public health around the state that our county enjoys. And I think we shouldn't. I think we should take the opportunity of COVID to do a deeper dive, ask what we've learned, and to demonstrate the value of public health and to build support for the long range for public health. So I'm looking for staff support in helping how to frame that question, but also what have we really learned, and also maybe in tune with our our not-for-profit partners in the community and the city of Rochester. school district, I think there's a lot of lessons here that you've learned about deeper collaboration in disease prevention and in community response. So,
Yeah, we after any sort of emergency response, we do what we call a hot wash, which is a debriefing afterwards. Try to learn what we could have done better, what we did well, highlight that sort of stuff, and evolve every time we do this. The big challenge that I think we have during the pandemic now is that it's so huge, it probably requires multiple different debriefings and multiple different after action reports, from the staff level and the leadership level, the state level. And I do agree that there's a change going on in the public health system here in Minnesota as to what the future of public health really looks like with prevention and with community partnership and collaboration. And so I think this is a possible opportunity for us, just like we did during this last legislative session, to really talk about how public health and doing this sort of work can lead to us avoiding larger issues. And I think Olmsted has the staff here, the community, the collaborations that we've had has learned just an amazing amount of information during the pandemic as to what that collaborative approach can do and what it can mean for a community. And you can see that in our final numbers. So I think the future of public health, as we're going into it, we'll be talking more and more, I think, about Public Health 3.0. I think, as Commissioner Cascaden mentions, there's still a lot up in the air as to where we're going as a state, but this is something that we're embracing here in Olmsted County, is this idea of Public Health 3.0, where it really is relying on blending our funding together, looking at partnership in the community, using localized, down to the neighborhood level data to understand where we've got gaps in COVID vaccination versus where we've got higher rates of diabetes, things like that can allow us to focus some of our prevention efforts down to the community level. And I think Megan Sheridan is going to join us in a minute here and can talk a little bit more about that. But before I ask her to come up and talk, I mentioned I wanted to avoid charts and graphs today because I've been doing that for a year and a half. And I thought for today, just to summarize, since we are seeing our emergency operations shut down, that if I pulled some pictures together here that we've collected during the pandemic and showed those to the board, this could tell the story of the pandemic much better than I ever could. So if the chair will allow me, I'd like to show this to the group. And then Megan, if you want to come up for the impact survey right after this, you're more than welcome to. Thank you. I wanted to mention here quick before I hand it over to Megan. I asked Mike Bellius, Denise Daniels, and Dan Jensen to join us today. Denise and Mike are the associate directors at the health department, and Dan was our operations chief throughout the pandemic response. And I did very little of the work. I came and talked to you guys and helped to organize some things, but it's really those three that solved the issues, fixed problems, and helped get us through this. So I wanted to thank them today with the board. Thank you.
I just want to add to that, was very moving. And sometimes when you're in the middle of the swamp, you lose track of how awful it is until you are out of the swamp and you can look back. And I wrote down 3 Ds that I thought of as watching that: diligence and determination and dedication. Really, we owe such gratitude towards all of you for getting this community through this. We were in really good hands, and that was touching. There was something about the music too that just fit with that, and because we were all kind of a little bit on edge and tinkly like that music. So that was wonderful. We should see that again next time we uh, think we're going to be in a problem, to remember what this was like and what it took to get us through. Thank you. I'm just going to stand up because I want to thank
Madam Chair, before Megan starts, no, Megan, head on up to the microphone. I just want to provide a little bit of context for this next item. The board has been working on the Relief Act funding, and you had a retreat back in April. We will be having another retreat on the 21st of this month to talk about it more, how the board would like to see allocation of those funds. And this data that Megan's about to provide and speak about really is being used by the departments to help bring forward to you, the board, some recommendations about what else you might allocate funding towards to try to assist the community to move through and correct some of those impacts that the community is feeling. So I just want to provide a little bit of that impact. We're not going to talk a lot about what those ideas are today. That'll come on the 21st of July. So today is just the data.
Thank you for that, teeing it up. And good morning, commissioners. My name is Megan Sheridan. I am a program manager at Public Health. And so you heard Graham talk about COVID in our community. What I'm going to talk about is the impacts of COVID-19 in our community. So if we go to the next slide, and we can just dive in right to the third one. Thank you. So about the survey. So the big thing is always saying have that why. So our medical consultant, Dr. Malala, really had championed this since, I would say, since last summer, that we need to do something to understand the impact of COVID outside of just the case numbers, the hospitalizations and deaths. At the same time, Graham and I were in some conversations with other metro counties too around potentially partnering with the U of M to do an impact survey. That kind of fizzled out, but Dr. Malala kept channeling and championing for this survey, so which we're extremely thankful for. But at the end of the day, the big reason why we did it is we wanted to get a midpoint opportunity to look at the impacts of COVID. So we administered the survey in early 2021. We applied a mixed methods approach, which really means, just like our previous community surveys, we did a random mail, but then we also partnered with like Channel One, our HHH partners, IMAA, to do convenient surveys as well, because we know random mail surveys can only go to so many people and so many people participate in them. So the random mail survey was 2,000 and we received 737 back. That is our highest response rate we have ever had for a community health survey. So that was exciting to see. Like I had mentioned, we modeled not only our methodology, but we also modeled our questions after previous surveys, which as a data person is very exciting because then we can see trends. So we're not looking at data just as this one point, but we're able to look back in 2018 and 2015, in some cases 2013 as well. We also wanted to make sure we weighted the data. So the data I'm going to show you is generalizable for Olmsted County residents. So if you go to the next slide, before I show the data, I always think it's really important to understand the context of the survey, but also the context of what was going on in our community when it was administered. So like I mentioned, the survey was administered in early 2021. So, but to drill down a little bit more specifically, it was late January, and through February. So again, there's a lot of things going on in the world besides COVID. So again, just wanting to make sure we're calling out that context. The other piece too is we know there's a lot of community partners who have done focus groups, other types of surveys. And so really for you all to consider, this is one data source that should be used in partnership with the work that other community members have done. Like I mentioned, when the survey was administered, but then also our community context. So if I had the epi curve that Graham showed, if we look at late January, early February, we were coming out of the November, December spike, and things were slowly starting to kind of trickle back down. So again, just wanting to make sure we're all understanding of when this data was collected. So if we could start to dive into what the data looked at, we first looked at delay of care. So we know from from state resources, from national resources, there was a huge potential for delay of care, and we heard that. But we at a state and federal level, but we also saw it here. So we can look at 2018 and 2021. So 2021 will be that COVID impact survey. So you can see just under 30% of people, our adult population, reported any delay of care in 2018. That jumped to almost 55, 56% in 2021. Again, not super surprising. And again, it's also not surprising to see dental care was the top delay because that dental clinics for a good chunk of the beginning of the pandemic were closed. But we also can look at medical care delay. We didn't ask about preventive screening delay, so it wasn't at 0% in 2018, but then we can also look at mental health delay as well. The next questions series that we focused on was feeling unaccepted or unwelcomed, because just as we had the COVID pandemic, we also wanted to have information, especially with the county declaring racism as a public health issue. So we collected data in 2018 and 2021, and you can see that there was a slight increase to 2021 of just around 45% of Olmsted County residents feeling unaccepted or unwelcome at some point. You can also see the top reasons to not change from the two survey years. The top were not friendly, social and economic differences, discrimination, and racial differences. I will say not friendly and social and economic differences by far were the top two. Discrimination and racial differences were much smaller. If we look at the next slide, this is social connectedness. So again, we know with COVID in the pandemic, social connectedness was hard to come by at some points. We didn't specifically ask our social connected questions, but you can just see for context in 2015 and 2018. Already in 2018, we had a smaller proportion of our county residents reporting being socially connected, but we also then, from the impact survey, we asked around changes in communication with families and friends and neighbors. So you can see that 51% said their communication decreased with their neighbors and 47.3% with their family and friends. All right, this next slide is looking at individual and community resiliency. So the first two of access to resources and skills to help others are looking in considerations for individual resiliency. Count on my community to respond and count on my community to fully recover. That's looking at community resiliency. So we didn't see a huge difference with individual resiliency. We did see it go decrease, but we can see that dip with that community resiliency just under 70%. So the main focus of the survey as well was to better understand our community health improvement plan, priorities of financial stress, mental health, and substance use. So we spent a large part of our survey trying to dig in and understand those. So the first is financial stress. So we had 34% of our Olmsted County adults reported being financially stressed in 2021. The graph here is looking at the various indicators we included, such as financial status got worse, financially stressed, rent or mortgage, household income, and then housing stability decreased. I think this is where that context really matters. So when we asked these questions, there were a lot of supports put in the community, not only in Olmsted County, but at the state and at the federal level. For example, rent moratorium, student loan forbearance, utility protection. So the fact that we still saw people reporting being financially stressed when there was some of those protections, if you will, makes us really concerned to think about when those things start to get rolled back, of what impact is that going to have on someone's financial stress. We will be surveying our community, doing our full survey at the end of this year. So this is, again, we think a really helpful point to have that midpoint, but then we'll have a point at the end of the year too to really be able to compare and see if our hypothesis is true. You can see too, I listed out some other aspects of the data. With financial stress, mental health, and substance use, we did look at disparities. So for financial stress, we saw ones connected to if children lived in the household, birthplace, so not from the United States, education level of no college, income less than $35,000, home ownership, so rent if you were a renter, and then retirement status if you weren't retired. We also wanted to look and understand that we know our top 3 priorities are very connected. So we also could see through the data that there was financial stress and poor mental health status were connected. We go to the next slide. This is looking at mental health. And so we typically, when we assess mental health, we ask, have you ever been told by a provider that you have a mental health condition? And when I was doing the analysis, I was kind of surprised at first to not see a huge difference from 2018 to 2021. But then we have to, again, remember how we asked the question. We asked, have you ever been told by a mental health provider? Well, if there was mental health delay, that turned out not to be the best way to measure mental health in Olmsted County. Thankfully, we also have another metric that we look at. We typically don't show it a lot because there's a lot of nuances that go into it, but I think for this case, it's really important to see. So we also use the WHO Well-Being Index, and that's looking at 5 categories of cheerful, calm and relaxed, active, fresh and rested, and interested in life, and it's asked in the past 2 weeks. So again, this is where context really matters, because in 2 weeks, situations change a lot, and your mental health and your well-being can change sometimes by the hour, sometimes by the day, sometimes by the month. And so again, just wanting to call that out there. So if you look though, we have 2015, 2018, and 2021. You can see that in each of those well-being categories, we did see a decrease. The one that kind of, I'll be honest with you, was a little bit of a gut punch was that interested in life at the end, of dropping from almost 70% to around 44% or 49%. So what we can do is also come up with a composite score for these that are indicated of depression, low mood, which isn't the best term, but that's the term they use. So kind of you're in the middle of the mental health continuum, and then positive mental health. So as to be expected, since we saw a decrease in all of these categories, we did see a decrease in Olmsted County residents reporting positive mental health. We have disparities, again, connected to gender, identity, birthplace, race, ethnicity, marital status, income, and retirement status. And I will say mental health was probably by far in the top priorities, the connector that kind of brought financial stress and substance use together, because we saw very strong connections between mental health and those priorities. If we look at our last one, so for substance use, we did not ask the full series around substance use questions, because it actually takes up a whole page in order to be able to calculate like binge drinking and things. But from the notes, you can see 38% of Olmsted County adults in 2018 reported using any substance. 25 or 27.5 reported any binge drinking behavior. And I think when I share this data with, when I share that with anyone, that's in itself a cause for alarm. But again, wanting to just kind of provide that context for everyone. So we have seen an increase in substance use since the pandemic began. The graph is showing alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and other drugs, and then any increase. So around 19% of adults reported any increase in substance, and 17 reported any increase or reported an increase in alcohol use. 11% were concerned about their increase, and then we saw disparities connected to race, ethnicity, household income, and retirement status. It's also important to call out, we do see differences when we look at alcohol by itself and when we look at any increase by itself with the disparities. We did see connections to poor mental health status, both mental health and then self-reported mental health issues and delay in mental health care. So what I've provided is a very high level. We do have a report on the website that a report, and then we have also all the data tables available for the community to see. So then we'll just go to the last slide for next steps. So a big part of this is just getting the data in front of people and being able to share it and then have some conversations around it, because I will tell you it's been very enlightening when we've been sharing the data to kind of understand and hear more of those different contexts or ideas around potentially what the data is saying. So we've been doing that. We've also have been sharing this out with the rest of the state of Minnesota, and we actually have 2 or 3 other local public health agencies who are going to be using our survey to do their own COVID impact survey. So we've been able to kind of put that investment, but it's being able to be used outside of our context as well. And then last but not least, the data is helping inform our community health improvement plan, and really looking at what those strategies. I think it has been extremely helpful to understand and look at the data that's that real time, if you will, versus looking at 2018, because our community has changed. I think we can see that with the data. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, would you define binge drinking?
Yes, well, it's different for men and women. So women, who is 4, males are 5, and it's within a sitting, if you will. It's there's some scientificness that goes with it, but how we ask the question is trying to interpret how many drinks are being consumed in one sitting.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Megan, would you tell them, I thought it was really illuminating, Megan did this presentation for department directors so that we could start to think about, okay, what can we suggest to the board as potential remedies? Could you give them the statistics about Minnesota and Wisconsin being, this blew me away.
So to kind of follow up on your comment or question, Commissioner Castedan, so Olmsted County actually has higher binge drinking rates than the state of Minnesota, but I made the comment, and I typically have in other presentations too, Minnesota and Wisconsin are typically competing for the #1 spot in binge drinking. Not something we all want to be super proud of, but that's...
Let the Badgers win.
Yeah, yeah, right? That's when I'm okay to let Wisconsin take the lead on that one.
You're saying that Minnesota and Wisconsin are among the leaders in binge drinking, and Olmsted County is the leader in Minnesota?
Not in Minnesota overall. We have a higher rate than the state of Minnesota overall. So there's other counties probably that have higher ones. But that's where it's to, not to kind of go completely down a rabbit hole, but we will for 1 second. The thing is, I'll come back. So with alcohol use, we typically see it to be among more educated, higher income, white, versus when we look at other substances, it's actually the inverse. So I think it's also potentially just a product of what our county's makeup is as well.
That's a good point. And cost, maybe.
And the availability,
Yep.
and it's
And-
legal.
Yes, and that it's legal and that being accessible.
It was telling
Tastes
that
good.
an essential service was that they did not close the liquor stores. They closed dentist offices.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions I can answer about the data?
It's very helpful to have your description and your insights as we go along, because I've looked at the charts and I learned a lot from listening to you.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Happy to.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Commissioner Wright?
I have a comment. But
Yeah.
not a question for you, so
Okay.
it's kind of a lengthy comment, but you can sit down if you want.
Sounds good. I appreciate it.
Should we all lean back?
Yeah, lean back, relax. It's first of all, I think it's really good that public health is keeping track of this stuff, and my hope is that our public health department, along with other public health department, document all of this information in some way, because there will be another pandemic, and I really don't want the future folks that have this pandemic to be caught off guard. And in fact, when this pandemic started, I started working on the pandemic when I was still working at my other job, because the state of Minnesota and the colleges were looking at pandemic. They knew it was coming. It was predicted. And so they started to do some plans a long time ago, 10 years ago, on pandemic. The difficulty is that they had nothing to go back on to look at research or what was done in the pandemic that preceded us. And everything that they could think of what might this look like turned out to be not in fact the case of what it really turned out to look like. And in fact, they underestimated everything about what this pandemic would look like. And they underestimated the impact that it would have on society. And just off the top of my head, you can think of the economic impact that it had that really wasn't predicted about how this was going to turn the economic situation in the country upside down. The dismantling of the supply chain was not anticipated, and the rebuilding of the supply chain that we're still struggling with right now, and the shipping of goods and services was not at all talked about. The eviction rates and the housing rates really wasn't one of those factors that they looked at the beginning of the last pandemic, but yet we're dealing with those today. The loss of education opportunities wasn't anticipated. The anti-vax movement wasn't anticipated. The public resistance wasn't anticipated. The political influences that affected homelessness, the healthcare disparities that came to light. Student debt, of course, wasn't an issue in the last pandemic, and it became an issue in this pandemic. The income gaps that began and will continue in the future, because there were winners and losers economically in this pandemic. Those people that kept their jobs, those people that kept an income, are now economically way, way, way ahead of people that lost their jobs and tapped into their 401ks and tapped into their retirement. And we are going to deal with that issue in the future, because a lot of those people ran out of money. But those people that kept their jobs, kept funding their 401ks, kept their retirement, they're going to be much better off economically 20, 30, 40 years, and it will pass on to the next generation. So if you think of generational wealth, some of the families that kept their jobs and kept their investments will create generational wealth, while other families will have lost it. And we're going to be dealing with that in the counties. The mental health aspects, which we just talked about, wasn't anticipated. the enormous money that the alcohol industry made over this last year. It was one of the winners in this. And it's not necessarily a good winner, but it is a winner. And they never anticipated the effects of isolationism and that we dealt with. And those are just like 14 or 15 off the top of my head that I think needed to be documented and things that need to be written about in the public health journals as well as other journals so that people in the future can look back on this and say, geez, maybe there are things that we can be improved on. And I think the state of Minnesota also learned something from this. They defunded public health over the years. Some counties had virtually no public health, or they had one person that was supposed to deal with public health. And it was one of those things is that politically, people look at it and say, oh, we don't need that. We'll never have another pandemic. We'll never need that. You know, we have all these other things to take place. And then all of a sudden, here you are. It's like selling all of your snow removal equipment and then you hit by a snowstorm and nobody can move. I mean, it's one of those typical things that happens in government that we sometimes aren't as foresighted as we needed to be. So my hope is that we do document this. And I know that we are focused on public health, but there's all these other things like the economics that's harder to document, but need to be in there somewhere so that people can plan on these things. So thank you very much.
Well, all very much happier now. Thank you. Brother loves travel and salvation show. You're right. But we have no idea how things will be in 100 years. Either.
No, and we're
if
going to
this
be
information will be helpful or not. But you're right about all the impacts that we were surprised by.
well, just you say 100 years, but I think the possibility of a pandemic is less than 100 years. So, but other experts can talk about
Madam
that.
Chair, I think we're supposed to.
Yes,
I'd love to get into this
leave.
conversation with some depth, and I think there's some other partners.
I wouldn't.
that we probably need to have in the discussion about the future, but we really are supposed to adjourn in 5 minutes. I think we have one more item.
There is?
I believe there was, is this the COVID wrap-up? That was
Well, we had that
survey
already.
response.
Yeah.
We switched it?
Wrapped it up.
Okay.
Yep,
All
that
right.
was our, so
still
we
need
are
to adjourn.
wrapped in ribbons.
Wrapped it up.
Okay. Entertain a motion for
Almost.
adjournment.
Second.